Hey guys, this is Anne Marie and this is the Anti-HR channel, and I have been behind on making videos. So while I'm putting my makeup on to go meet a friend for drinks, I am going to talk a little bit about racial microaggressions in the workplace, because this is something that comes up a lot in my discovery calls and with my work with my clients. At the Anti-HR, I help employees deal with HR issues. On this channel, I teach employees about HR issues. I give HR tips. I teach employees how to understand, recognize, know about their workplace rights and how to exert those workplace rights, to raise those workplace rights when they feel that they are being violated. So if that's of interest to you, please hit the like button, subscribe, comment, and share this video with a friend. But I want to talk today about racial microaggressions. I wrote a couple notes down because I literally wrote a blog post about this today, and I want to make sure that I cover some of the things I talk about in the blog post, so I'm not just doing a random chat that I do sometimes on the channel. But racial microaggressions, not to be confused with regular microaggressions, are what I'm going to talk about today, because it's something that comes up a lot with my clients and potential clients on discovery calls, and it's something that really can be very problematic for people of color, and especially Black people, and particularly Black women. And I'm going to be talking about it today from the perspective of Black women and how we recognize, not recognize, but experience this in the workplace. And the reason why it's important to recognize these things is that when you talk about them, when you document and you talk about them, you want to be talking about them with the in the right way and with the right terminology. And you don't want to be calling something a microaggression that is a different type of discriminatory behavior, right? You want to talk about gaslighting, which can take the form of microaggression. But you want to talk about these things in the right context, because remember, if you are not able to show that these things are happening in a discriminatory way, in other words, you're being targeted because of a protected characteristic like race, ethnicity, gender, etc., your argument of discrimination is likely to fall flat on its face, and then you basically just single yourself out to be further targeted and harassed in your workplace. So if you're going to raise these issues, you want to raise them effectively. And so I want to make sure that I explain some of these things so that when you see them, recognize, or feel that they're happening to you, you know how to talk about them, right? And how to raise them and how to document them. So one of the main ways that we experience microaggressions in the workplace, and first let's talk about what a microaggression is, right? Because it's an actual thing, and everything is not a microaggression, just like everything is not racism. Because a lot of times people like to call things microaggressions that aren't microaggressions, right? Microaggressions are very subtle actions that people undertake and things that people do that are not overt acts of bias. And they can be all types of bias, right? But we're going to talk about bias from a racial dimension today, but there are other kinds of microaggressions, right? But it's usually subtle, and often in many cases, the person might not even have consciousness that what they're doing is a problem. And that doesn't matter, right? If you're causing someone harm and you're engaging in behavior that is racist, it doesn't matter whether you meant to or you didn't mean to. It's literally immaterial, okay? But it's important to understand that in a lot of cases, when people are doing these things, they're not doing them overtly, because there are things that people do in the workplace that are racist, and it's quite overt, right? They're almost daring you to complain or to say something, right? So this is one of those things where people do things and say things that even on the surface may seem well-meaning, that they don't mean anything by it, and they may not actually mean anything by it, but the impact of it and the way that they do it still has a racial dimension to it and still has a racist impact. Right? So one of the main things and ways that we experience microaggressions in the workplace is the questioning of our competence, right? That when we make a comment or recommendation, it's questioned, or you get a perfect example of that is, you speak so well. You're so articulate. right? Now, on the surface, that may sound complimentary, but it's actually not, because the implication is you speak so well, fill in the blank, for a Black person. You're so articulate for a Black woman, right? Because the expectation is that you're not supposed to speak well, right? Because when was the last time you heard a white person say that to another white person in a meeting when they made a point, right? Or said it to them in an interview? Never. And I've sat in lots of interviews of all kinds of people, and I've never heard that said about a white person during a meeting or after a meeting in describing them or talking about them, even in positive terms. They don't talk about how articulate they are. They talk about their qualifications, right? So while that may sound like it's a compliment, it's not. It's a microaggression, and it's racial. And the thing about microaggressions is they're hard to prove. It's hard to prove that they're racist. You have to really look at the pattern of behavior, and you have to pay close attention to how the person behaves with other people, which is something I always tell people to do. Pay less attention to what they're saying to you, more attention to what they're not saying to other people around you. Because it's subtle, and on the surface, it seems like it's well-meaning. It's not that big of a deal, but it is, right? And it may sound like it's backhanded, often these backhanded compliments that you get. But one of it is you speak so well, or are you sure you can handle this? When you volunteer for something, or you speak up about something, or you're volunteering to do a project, are you sure you can handle it is another one you can be asked. Are you sure you're going to be able to do that? Are you sure you know how to do this, right? And again, if they are not making this kind of commentary to other people, they shouldn't be making it to you in the context of you being able to do your work, right? So when they do that, you have every right to be concerned about it. Another way, and that happens a lot in the workplace, is the exoticizing of our appearance. This is, oh, I've never seen braids like that before. Oh, what did you do with your hair? Oh, can I touch your hair? Oh, that's so pretty. Can I touch it? That's exoticizing someone's appearance. You don't see people walking around saying, that's a beautiful shade of blonde. Can I touch it? Right? That may happen in foreign countries, but you don't see it happening in your workplace. So it shouldn't happen to you either. Right? So those kinds of things are also microaggressions, and they're also racial in nature, because if they're not walking around asking to touch everybody else's in the office's hair, they shouldn't be asking to touch yours either, right? So another way, and I wrote some of these down to make sure I didn't forget them, that this shows up is tokenism, right? And overgeneralization and tokenism. And what I mean by that is when you are the only person, and it's intentional. You're the only one. Nobody else like you gets hired. And then you're expected to speak on behalf of all Black people and all diversity in the entire company or in the world. Something happens. For example, I can give you an example. I was once working in an office, and I was working with several attorneys. They were all white males. This is when I was a legal assistant back early in my life. And the Rodney King incident occurred. Some of y'all might be too young to remember it, but you can Google it. But the Rodney King incident occurred, and then the riots in LA occurred, right? And this white woman in the office, the only white woman, thankfully, and I told a story about how my boss eventually got her out of the office because she was becoming a problem for me. And she comes out to me and she says, why are they doing that? And I was really taken aback, and I said, they who? And she was asking why the Black people in the city were rioting, as if I was some authority. My 20-something-year-old self was some authority on how all these Black people in LA, and I'm in Washington, D.C. at the time, were behaving. And I asked her why she was asking me that question, and I told her that maybe she should pay attention to the news reports to get a better insight into why the people were setting places on fire. I was younger then, so I didn't have the ability to articulate it the way I would be able to articulate it now. But I said to her, I imagine they're unhappy about how they're being treated, but why are you asking me? They're reporting this on the news. They're explaining it on the news. You know, why are you asking me this question? Because I don't like this woman anyway, so I really didn't want to have this conversation with her. But that's an example of a microaggression because there were news reports everywhere about what was happening. There's absolutely no reason for her to single me out as the one Black person in the suite, and I was the only person, the legal secretary, to ask this question, especially when they were having reports about why it was. And obviously it was because they had found these police officers not guilty of beating this man within an inch of his life, despite the fact that there was videotape of them beating him damn near to death, right? So that's an example of a microaggression when you are tokenized and are expected to be the mouthpiece on all Black issues, on all issues that affect whatever your group is, your racial group. And this shows up also when people are openly gay, when people belong to a particular ethnic group. Why are they, referring to people as they is a problem in and of itself, right? And the expectation that you should be the mouthpiece and the spokesperson for all issues that happen. And I know this happened to a lot of Black people in 2020 during the George Floyd incident and the aftermath of that, right? Where we're expected at a time when we are feeling a lot of pain and a lot of hurt over what we are watching and seeing, and being traumatized, we're then expected to explain things to white folk, right? And be the mouthpiece for all Black people. And that's a problem, right? So that's an example. Also, the last one I would say that is very problematic is the minimization of discrimination. So when you go and you raise a concern about discrimination and you're told, oh, I'm sure they didn't mean that, or it's not that big of a deal, or you're making too big of a deal about this, or you're being overly sensitive. All of those things are microaggressions, right? Because when you flip it, if you didn't look like you and someone else complained about you, you're told you have a communication problem, that you need to change your tone, that you need to do this differently. The other person isn't told. Karen isn't told that she's being overly sensitive, right? Karen isn't told to go sit down somewhere and stop crying, right? But you get immediately called in and told about your tone of voice and that this person that they don't feel safe, a term a lot of them like to use, and these kinds of things. That's an example of a discriminatory minimization of someone's discrimination experience. When you go and complain about things that are happening to you at work, and HR is really big on doing this one, but also you go to your manager and your manager tells you, oh, you're being too sensitive. So in all of these cases, the best way to deal with it, I think, and in my blog post, I give lots of tips about how you might respond to it. But one of the ways you might respond to this is, for example, someone makes a comment, right? You ask them, what did they mean by it? You make them explain what they said, right? Or you say to them, you know, I would like to think you don't realize that what you just said is racially insensitive, but it is, and here's the reason why. But the most important thing is not only calling out the thing when it happens, but documenting the fact that you did confront it, what you said, what they responded and did, and any retaliatory actions or problems that occur after the incident, right? Anytime you're dealing with microaggressions or any other type of discriminatory treatment in the workplace, you must carefully document it, right? I have a documentation journal on my website. It will also be attached to this video. I would suggest that you download it. It not only tells you about tips about documentation and explaining certain terms, including microaggressions, so that you recognize them and know how to document them, but it also, you know, gives you a lot of prompts for documentation and a lot of information about discrimination inside of the journal. So I highly recommend that if you don't know anything about documentation and you haven't been documenting your workplace, that you download that journal and keep it handy in case you're dealing with discrimination. As I said, I have a lengthy blog post now live on my website about recognizing racial microaggressions and how to respond to them. I hope you will read the blog post. It will be linked to this video. I hope you find it helpful. As always, HR is not your enemy, but they're definitely not your friend, but I am. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.